All right, I am about to make them wrap up. We have had several different kinds of conversations that are not 100% on topic, and I started it, so we're done. That we are now, you guys at home, you can see that today is May the 4th, and we do have a few people who are able to find some Star Wars or space shirts. And then I know in Miss Mutz Davis's room, there was a few more who ended up having some, just something fun for today. But what we're reading is not about Star Wars. Yesterday, we got to see the Warden in action again. And what did the Warden do? AB?
Venom on it.
She had her special nail polish, and Mr. Sir took Stanley to her cabin, and she got her fingernails and she rubbed it up against Mr. Sir's face.
Mm-hmm. So she scratched him is what she ended up doing, right? And what happened to him?
He got stung
venom seeped into his cuts.
Wait, what type of venom is it?
It was that rattlesnake venom, and so that really hurt. He ended up being on the floor in pain, and so Stanley had to go back to digging his holes. Now then, when he got back, his hole was basically finished. What did we learn after that, Kaylee?
The Zero, once he felt bad because he blamed himself for taking the seeds and not wasn't it X-ray who taking
Magnet stole them. Mm-hmm.
And he said it was himself, and I think Zero felt bad, so he dug his hole because he knew he was probably going to be gone for a while, and it would have to dig a lot more. So Zero, since he was the fastest digger, he was done with his hole, and he went and done Stanley, so that whenever Stanley got back, Stanley could teach him how to read, so that they would have even more time, so Zero could learn to read.
Yeah, very good. They ended up making a deal, making a trade of services. That's in our economics talk we're doing. And so that's kind of where we left off with Stanley that night, thinking back to where he realized he knew what that gold tube was that he had found also. And he made the connection to who? And Kate Barlow. Okay, so today, he just was saying he saw that type of tube. He knew that was a lipstick tube. Now, today, we're going to be going back and forth from present day to the past, just like we did the other day, so that you can learn some new information. I forgot that I wanted you to have your response journal. So, while I read, because I am going to go ahead and start to read. Hold on just a second, because it will make some noises, because I know our chairs are pulled up. I'm going to start to read, but you're going to get your notebook out because there's going to be spots where I want you to stop and jot. So just quietly, as best you can, grab that, and I'm going to start to read chapter 23. 110 years ago, Green Lake was the largest lake in Texas. It was full of clear, cool water, and it sparkled like a giant emerald in the sun. It was especially beautiful in the spring, when the peach trees which lined the shore bloomed with pink and rose-colored blossoms. There was always a town picnic on the 4th of July. They played games, dance, sing, and swim in the lake to keep cool. Prizes were awarded for the best peach pie and peach jam. A special prize was given every year to Miss Catherine Barlow for her famous spiced peaches. No one else even tried to make spiced peaches because they knew no one could be as delicious as hers. Every summer, Miss Catherine would pick bushels of peaches and preserve them in jars with cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, and other spices which she kept secret. The jarred peaches would last all winter. They probably would have lasted a lot longer than that, but they were always eaten by the end of winter. It was said that Green Lake was heaven on earth, and that Miss Catherine's spiced peaches were food for the angels. Catherine Barlow was the town's only schoolteacher. She taught in an old one-room schoolhouse. It was old even then. The roof leaked, the windows wouldn't open, the door hung crooked on its bent hinges. She was a wonderful teacher, full of knowledge and full of life. The children loved her. She taught classes in the evening for adults, and many of the adults loved her as well. She was very pretty. Her classes were often full of young men who were a lot more interested in the teacher than they were in getting an education. But all they ever got was an education. One such young man was Trout Walker. His real name was Charles Walker, but everyone called him Trout because his 2 feet smelled like a couple of dead fish. This wasn't entirely Trout's fault. He had an incurable foot fungus. In fact, it was the same foot fungus that 110 years later would afflict the famous ball player Clyde Livingston. But at least Clyde Livingston showered every day. "Why, I take a bath every Sunday morning," Trout would brag, "whether I need to or not." Most everyone in town of Green Lake expected Miss Catherine to marry Trout Walker. He was the son of the richest man in the county. His family owned much of the peach trees and all the land on the east side of the lake. Trout often showed up at night school, but never paid attention. He talked in class and was disrespectful of the students around him. He was loud and stupid. A lot of men in town were not educated. That didn't bother Miss Catherine. She knew that they spent most of their lives working on farms and ranches and hadn't had much schooling. That was why she was there, to teach them. But Trout didn't want to learn. He seemed to be proud of his stupidity. "How'd you like to take a ride on my new boat this Saturday?" he asked her one evening after class. "No, thank you," said Miss Catherine. "Oh, we got a brand new boat," he said. "You don't even have to row it." "Yes, I know," said Miss Catherine. Everyone in town had seen and heard the Walkers' new boat. It made a horrible loud noise and spewed ugly black smoke over the beautiful lake. Trout had always gotten everything he ever wanted. He found it hard to believe that Miss Catherine had turned him down. He pointed his finger at her and said, "No one ever says no to Charles Walker." "I believe I just did," said Catherine Barlow. Pause. You felt it on your paper. I want you to take, probably going to take you about 50 seconds or so. What are your thoughts on how this is going to affect the story? Go. And that's the same thing that I'm wanting you guys to do at the house, is to stop and think, stop and jot. If you have notebook paper, do that. If you're just typing on your computer, do that. Know that you're still writing. I'm going to go ahead and start to read. You just finish up. Chapter 24. Stanley was half asleep as he got in line for breakfast, but the sight of Mr. Sir awakened him. The left side of Mr. Sir's face had swollen to the size of half a cantaloupe. There were 3 dark purple jagged lines running down his cheek where the warden had scratched him. The other boys in Stanley's tent had obviously seen Mr. Sir as well, but they had the good sense not to say anything. Stanley put a carton of juice and a plastic spoon on his tray. He kept his eyes down and hardly breathed as Mr. Sir ladled some oatmeal-like stuff into his bowl. He brought his tray to the table. Behind him, a boy from one of the other tents said, "Hey, what happened to your face?" There was a crash. Stanley turned to see Mr. Sir holding the boy's head against the oatmeal pot. "Is something wrong with my face?" The boy tried to speak but couldn't. Mr. Sir had him by the throat. "Does anyone see anything wrong with my face?" asked Mr. Sir, as he continued to choke the boy. Nobody said anything. Mr. Sir let the boy go. His head banged against the table as he fell to the ground. Mr. Sir stood over him and asked, "How does my face look to you now?" A gurgling sound came out of the boy's mouth. Then he managed to gasp the word, "Fine. I'm kind of handsome, don't you think?" "Yes, Mr. Sir." Out on the lake, the other boys asked Stanley what he knew about Mr. Sir's face, but he just shrugged and dug his hole. If he didn't talk about it, maybe it would go away. He worked as hard and as fast as he could, not trying to pace himself. He just wanted to get off the lake and away from Mr. Sir as soon as possible. Besides, he knew he'd get a break. "Whenever you're ready, just let me know," Zero had said. The first time the water truck came, it was driven by Mr. Pendanski. The second time, Mr. Sir was driving. No one said anything except, "Thank you, Mr. Sir," as he filled each canteen. No one even dared to look at his grotesque face. As Stanley waited, he ran his tongue over the roof of his mouth and inside his cheeks. His mouth was as dry and as parched as the lake. The bright sun reflected off the side mirror of the truck, and Stanley had to shield his eyes with his hand. "Thank you, Mr. Sir," said Magnet, as he took his canteen from him. "You thirsty, caveman?" Mr. Sir asked. "Yes, Mr. Sir," Stanley said, handing his canteen to him. Mr. Sir opened the nozzle, and the water flowed out of the tank, but it did not go into Stanley's canteen. Instead, he held the canteen right next to the stream of water. Stanley watched the water splatter on the dirt, where it was quickly absorbed by the thirsty ground. Mr. Sir let the water run for about 30 seconds, and then stopped. "You want more?" he asked. Stanley didn't say anything. Mr. Sir turned the water back on, and again Stanley watched it pour onto the dirt. "There, that should be plenty." He handed Stanley his empty canteen. Stanley stared at the dark spot on the ground, which quickly shrank before his eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Sir," he said. Again, right. Either why did this happen or what is going to happen because of it. Stop and write. Some of you are still writing, that's fine. What do you think about Mr. Sir pouring that precious water onto the ground? AB?
I think it was kind of weird because he needs that water because he barely gets any water and why would he pour it on the ground? Like he could have just not given it anything.
I agree with that. One thing to just not give it to Stanley. A second to waste it. Natural resource just back into the earth when no one can drink it. Kaylee?
He may have done it from what happened the other day, from like just leaving him after he just got, leaving him with a warden after he just got badly hurt, scratched on his face. I think that kind of made him mad at Stanley and just wasted the water and not gave it to him.
Yeah, so when the warden had...
Sunflower seeds.
And the sunflower seeds, true, yeah. Now, so when the warden said, "Unfortunately for you," we were talking about that yesterday, that now we can see she was right. He is holding a grudge. So continue to think about both things. Remember, we're going from the past to the present. So now we're at chapter 25, which is going to be the past. Excuse me. There was a doctor in the town of Green Lake 110 years ago. His His name was Dr. Hawthorne, and whenever people got sick, they would go see Doc Hawthorne, but they would also see Sam, the onion man. "Onions! Sweet, fresh onions!" Sam would call, as he and his donkey, Mary Lou, walked up and down the dirt roads of Green Lake. Mary Lou pulled a cart full of onions. Sam's onion field was somewhere on the other side of the lake. Once or twice a week, he would row across the lake and pick a new batch to fill the cart. Sam had big, strong arms, but it would still take all day for him to row across the lake and another day for him to return. Most of the time, he would leave Mary Lou in a shed, which the walkers let him use with no charge, but sometimes he would take Mary Lou on his boat with him. Sam claimed that Mary Lou was almost 50 years old, which was, and still is, extraordinarily old for a donkey. "Well, she eats nothing but raw onions," Sam would say, holding up a white onion between his dark fingers. "It's nature's magic vegetable. If a person ate nothing but raw onions, he could live to be 200 years old." Sam was not much older than 20, so nobody was quite sure that Mary Lou was really as old as he said she was. How would you know? Still, nobody ever argued with Sam, and whenever they were sick, they would go not only to Doc Hawthorne, but also to Sam. Sam always gave the same advice: eat plenty of onions. He said that onions were good for digestion, the liver, the stomach, the lungs, the heart, and the brain. Well, if you don't believe me, just look at old Mary Lou here. She's never been sick a day in her life. He also made many different ointments, lotions, syrups, and paste, all made out of onion juice and different parts of the onion plant. This one cured asthma. That one was for warts and pimples. Another was a remedy for arthritis. He even had a special ointment which he claimed would cure baldness. "Well, just rub it on your husband's head enough every night when he's sleeping," Miss Collins would, "and soon his hair will be as thick and as long as Mary Lou's tail." Doc Hawthorne did not resent Sam. These folks of Green Lake were afraid to take chances. They would get regular medicine from Doc Hawthorne and onion concoctions from Sam. And after they got over their illness, no one could be sure, not even Doc Hawthorne, which of the two treatments had done the trick. Doc Hawthorne was almost completely bald, and in the morning, his head often smelled like onions. Because what was his wife doing? Rubbing his head at night. Whenever Catherine Barlow bought onions, she always bought an extra one or two and would let Mary Lou eat them out of her hand. "Was something wrong?" Sam asked her one day as she was feeding Mary Lou. "You seem distracted." "Oh, just the weather," said Miss Catherine. "It looks like rain clouds moving in." "Well, me and Mary Lou, we like the rain," said Sam. "Oh, I like it fine," said Miss Catherine, as she rubbed the donkey's rough hair on top of his head. "It's just that the roof leaks in the schoolhouse." "Well, I can fix that," said Sam. "Well, what are you going to do?" Catherine joked. "Fill the holes with onion paste?" Sam laughed. "I'm good with my hands," he told her. "I built my own boat. If it leaked, I'd be in big trouble." Catherine couldn't help but notice his strong, firm hands. They made a deal. He agreed to fix the leafy roof in exchange for 6 jars of spiced peaches. It took Sam a week to fix the roof because he could only work in the afternoons, after school let out and before night classes began. Sam wasn't allowed to attend classes because he was a Negro, but they let him fix the building. Miss Catherine usually stayed in the schoolhouse, grading papers and such, while Sam worked on the roof. She enjoyed what little conversation they were able to have, shouting up and down to each other. She was surprised by his interest in poetry. When he took a break, she would sometimes read a poem to him. On more than one occasion, she would start to read a poem by Poe or Longfellow, only to hear him finish it for her from his memory. She was sad when the roof was finished. "Was something wrong?" he asked. "No, you did a wonderful job," she said. "It's just that the windows won't open. The children and I would enjoy a breeze now and then." "I can fix that," said Sam. She gave him 2 more jars of peaches, and Sam fixed the windows. It was easier to talk to him when he was working on the windows. He told her about his secret onion field on the other side of the lake, where the onions grow all year round and the water runs uphill. When the windows were fixed, well, she complained that her desk wobbled. "I can fix that," said Sam. The next time she saw him, she mentioned the door doesn't hang straight, and she got to spend another afternoon with him while he fixed the door. And by the end of the first semester, Onion Sam had turned the old rundown schoolhouse into a well-crafted, freshly painted jewel of a building that the whole town was proud of. People passing by would stop and admire it. "Well, that's our schoolhouse. It shows how much we value education in Green Lake." The only person who wasn't happy with it was Miss Catherine. She'd run out of things that needed to be fixed. She sat at her desk one afternoon, listening to the pitter-patter of the rain on the roof. No water leaked into the classroom, except for the few drops that came from her eyes. "Onions! Hot, sweet onions!" Sam called out on the street. She ran to him. She wanted to throw her arms around him, but couldn't bring herself to do it. Instead, she hugged Mary Lou's neck. "Was something wrong?" he asked her. "Oh, Sam," she said, "my heart is breaking." "I can fix that," said Sam. She turned to him. He took hold of both her hands and kissed her. Because of the rain, there was nobody else out on the street. Even if there was, Catherine and Sam wouldn't have noticed. They were lost in their own world. At that moment, however, Hattie Parker stepped out of the general store. They didn't see her, but she saw them. She pointed her quivering finger in their direction and whispered, "God will punish you." Before we talk about it, I want you to write. All right, I do have hands, so I want us to talk about it. I wanted you to write just from what you know, and then now let's talk about why would this woman see 2 people kissing and say God will punish you? We have to incorporate the setting. What time frame was this?
A while ago.
Like a long time ago. So what do you know about a long time ago? Because some of you did make a face when I read a certain word. I was not being rude when I said that word. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Okay, so what do you know about that time if they even used that word? Yes, that this is back when there was possibly still slaves going on, but it sounds like Sam's not a slave. He's free. But does it sound like there was still discrimination between black and white?
That's why
Okay. So then why would this woman see these 2 people kiss and say, God will punish you? Trent?
Maybe because she doesn't agree with Tweet, and I think maybe she put a curse on him, and that's why her name is Kissing Kate Burns, because every time she kisses somebody, they die.
So making a connection there, it's possible, but understanding that this woman didn't agree with Sam, who is a black man, and Catherine, who is a white woman, kissing. We don't have that same, I can't even say the word, discrimination now. This is just because of the setting from back then. So it was important for you to understand that. Did you write down a prediction of what you think might happen now? Because Trent kind of gave us a good one. Because now I'm just going to keep reading because we need to just connect the dots now. Hold them upside down again. Chapter 26. There were no telephones, but word spread quickly through the small town. By the end of the day, everyone in Green Lake had heard that the school teacher had kissed the onion picker. Not one child showed up for school the next morning. Miss Catherine sat alone in the classroom and wondered if she had lost track of the day of the week. Perhaps it was Saturday. It wouldn't have surprised her. Her brain and heart had been spinning ever since Sam kissed her. She heard a noise outside the door. Then suddenly a mob of men and women came storming into the school building. They were led by Trout Walker. "There she is," Trout shouted. "The devil woman." The mob was turning over desks and ripping down bulletin boards. "She's been poisoning your children's brains with books," Trout declared. They began piling all the books in the center of the room. "Well, think about what you're doing," cried Miss Catherine. Someone made a grab for her, tearing her dress, but she managed to get out of the building. She ran to the sheriff's office. The sheriff had his feet up on his desk and was drinking from a bottle of whiskey. "Morning, Miss Catherine," he said. "Well, they're destroying the schoolhouse," she said, gasping for breath. "They'll burn it to the ground if someone doesn't stop them." "Just calm your pretty self down a second," the sheriff said in a slow drawl, "and tell me what you're talking about." He got up from his desk and walked over to her. "Well, Trout Walker has—" "Now, don't go saying nothing bad about Charles Walker," said the sheriff. "We don't have much time," urged Catherine. "You've got to stop them." "You're sure pretty," said the sheriff. Miss Catherine stared at him in horror. "Kiss me," said the sheriff. She slapped him across the face. He laughed. "Will you kiss the onion picker? Why won't you kiss me?" She tried to slap him again, but he caught her by the hand. She tried to wiggle free. "Well, you're drunk," she yelled. "I always get drunk before a hanging." "A hanging? Who?" "Oh, it's against the law for a Negro to kiss a white woman." "Well, then you'll have to hang me too," said Catherine, "because I kissed him back." "It ain't against the law for you to kiss him," the sheriff explained. "Just for him to kiss you." "Well, we're all equal under God's eyes," she declared. The sheriff laughed. "Then if Sam and I are equal, why won't you kiss me?" He laughed again. "I'll make you a deal. One sweet kiss, and I won't hang your boyfriend. I'll just run him out of town." Miss Catherine jerked her hand free. As she hurried to the door, she heard the sheriff say, "The law will punish Sam, and God will punish you." She stepped back into the street and saw smoke rising from the schoolhouse. She ran down to the lakefront where Sam was hitching Mary Lou to the onion cart. "Oh, thank God, I found you," she sighed, hugging him. "We've got to get out of here, now." "What?" "Someone must have seen us kissing yesterday," she said. "They set fire to the schoolhouse. The sheriff said he's going to hang you." Sam hesitated for a moment, as if he couldn't quite believe it. He didn't want to believe it. "Come on, Mary Lou." "We have to leave Mary Lou behind," said Catherine. Sam stared at her for a moment. There were tears in his eyes. "Okay." Sam's boat was in the water, tied to a tree by a long rope. He untied it, and they waded through the water and climbed aboard. His powerful arms rowed them away from the shore. But his powerful arms were no match for Trout Walker's motorized boat. They were little more than halfway across the lake when Miss Catherine heard the loud roar of the engine. Then she saw the ugly black smoke. These are the facts. The Walker boat smashed into Sam's boat. Sam was shot and killed in the water. Catherine Barlow was rescued against her wishes. When they returned to the shore, she saw Mary Lou's body lying on the ground. The donkey had been shot in the head. That all happened 110 years ago. Since then, not one drop of rain has fallen on Green Lake. You make the decision. Whom did God punish? 3 days after Sam's death, Miss Catherine shot the sheriff while he was sitting in his chair drinking a cup of coffee. Then she carefully applied a fresh coat of red lipstick and gave him the kiss he had asked for. For the next 20 years, Kissin' Kate Barlow was one of the most feared outlaws in the West.
She did that for love, and that's it.
Right?
Wait, the lipstick.
Write your thoughts. And that's the same for you. And then we're going to wrap up. I'm going to have them share some of their thoughts when we're finished. You guys are going to write it in the discussion board. Okay? Have a great day.